Vi har det. Du er jo en av de hovedfilmer liksom, på en masse politikk på alvor fra et faglig det er litt sånn stedet som gjør seg det er veldig mye som av veldig mye konkret saker. Men først reklamerer man håper du at det sitter toppen med meg det var det
Ja, det er ikke glatt ut.
Jo.
Takk skal du ha.
Ja, altså det var ikke It's not great. It's not because
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good morning. I think it's about time to start. It's nice to see that so many of you are here. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, welcome to this seminar. We call this seminar Norway, Asia and the Global Value Chain. I'm glad that so many of you could join us here at Litteraturhuset today, although you might know that our Institute NUPI is kind of located some 800 meters down the street, so you're welcome to NUPI anytime. We live in an age of rapid changes. Economic and political powers are shifting. From the center of gravity is moving from the north and west towards the east and south. Asia and Asian countries are becoming increasingly important also for global governance. And our Asian friends, of course, have a very demanding task of managing their rise. And we in the West need to make adjustments and to meet these new opportunities, to develop new economic ties and social ties and bonds. And we also have to face some adjustment challenges. Now, Norway is very far away from Asia. Some of the Asia-centered maps, world maps, if you have a look at them, you see Norway is a bit like the western fringe of Alaska on a Europe-centered map. Right? So we are very much in the periphery. Still, Asia plays an increasingly important role for Norway. First and foremost, of course, the rise of China and the rise of other Asian countries has increased the demand for the goods and commodities that Norway puts to the world market. So the prices has increased, and our terms of trade has we have benefited from improved trade benefits. In terms of direct engagement, the Asia region and some key countries are also becoming increasingly important for Norwegian trade in goods and services. And of course, Asia is also becoming increasingly important for Norwegian investments. By, for instance, the Norwegian government pension fund. I think I ran through the calculation this morning, and I think now around 850 billion Norwegian kroner are invested in Asian countries, up almost 200 billion from 2012. These investments are likely to increase. So that's 1.2 for us at NUPI, we follow the developments in Asia. We intensify our efforts at building our Asia competence and strengthening our ties with Asian partners. So NUPI will never become a world-leading institute on Asian affairs as such, but we aim for becoming probably one of the best in the world on Norway's relationship to Asia. So it's a modest but still a good ambition. And we like to follow the developments in Asia and how this impacts on Norwegian foreign policy. So we were therefore very glad when we won a bid last year to undertake a study commissioned by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Norway and its relationship to Asia's economic development. And the results from this study is now published and we will be presented here today at this seminar. It's composed of two different reports and studies. One, the first report contains two sections. First, a wide mapping of Asia's growing role in the world economy and Norway's economic relations with Asia, based on new sets of data on various indicators. And this part is written by senior researcher Arne Melchior, doctoral student Kristine Lie, and Professor Jo Torilin. In addition to this, we have another section or another report, a separate working paper, examining the rapid developments of regional trade agreements in the Asia region. And for this part of the report, we have been fortunate to cooperate with two of our Korean friends, Professor In-won Park from the Korea University, and Professor Dong-Yoon Park at the Asian Development Bank. On behalf of NUPI, I would like to thank you all for your effort and your contributions. But before we get to these reports, I'm very pleased and happy to welcome the State Secretary for in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Morten Høglund. Unfortunately, Børge Brende had to call in this morning and say that he couldn't join us, and we were of course disappointed by that, but at the same time very happy to hear that Morten Høglund could join us. Morten Høglund, as some of you know, he's one of the most experienced and most senior foreign policy politicians in Norway. He has been a key person in Norwegian foreign policy, representative from the Progress Party, and then also had a brief career as a diplomat, responsible or a special advisor for Arctic policy, and then he became returned to becoming a politician again as a state secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I'm very glad to have you here. In the foreign minister's address to the parliament this winter or spring, Børge Brende stressed the importance of the long-term structural shift in global governance. He underlined the need for Norway to further develop the Norwegian ties with Asian partners, and he also indicated he wanted to strengthen the commercial side of Norwegian diplomacy, which I think is also very important and fitting with revitalization of Norwegian policy and diplomacy towards Asia. And I guess Morten Høglund has been instrumental or partly instrumental in writing these words. So I give the floor to Morten Høglund, please.
Thank you very much, Ulf, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, and good morning. I was thinking back, I took office late November, and on average I've been traveling into Asia about once a month since late November, and it's also, for me, a great example of how important Asia is for us, and how much is going on in different fields, and not least also on the commercial side, which I will touch more upon. So it is truly a region we follow with deep interest, and with, of course, to protect our interest. Also look forward to listen to the reports being presented later. As has been mentioned, the most dramatic change in the world economy in recent decades has been the rise of Asia, both of individual countries as economic powers and of the region as a whole. Asian regional cooperation used to be based on how countries define the relationship with external actors such as the US or major European powers. Now, both self-interest and perceptions of common interests and values drive regional integration. More than half the world's population lives in Asia, a continent that accounts for 34% of the world's GDP and 28% of world trade. The Asian Development Bank has estimated that by 2050, more than 50% of global GDP will be generated in Asia, compared to 27% today. This means that in 20 years' time, most of the economic growth in the world is likely to take place in Asia. At the same time, we should not forget the other side of the coin: territorial disputes, nationalism, historical mistrust, and ideological differences, which all influence regional development. Many Asian states are vulnerable to changes in the global climate. 80% of the world's natural disasters occur in Asia. 2/3 of the world's poor live in Asia, most of them in the populous Asian middle-income states. The energy needs of the continent will be doubled by 2030, and half of this increase will be in China. And it was yesterday we saw the news from China about the new gas deal between Russia and China, which is rather significant after 10 years negotiations, and just shows how this plays out with global consequences. And all this poses great challenges for the developmental part of Asian states, both individually and collectively. And there is a good chance that we, the Western world, will continue to act as we have in Asia ever since the late 18th century, that we will pursue the potential for profit and the prosperous markets, just as when Japan and China first opened up for trade. Our objective is to have a presence in the region, to protect our own interest, and to benefit from the growth in Asia. What do we have to lose if we don't achieve this objective? We risk being bypassed by the rapid political changes that are taking place. Economic development paves the way for political influence. We are witnessing a global reshuffling of power as a result of changes in the distribution of economic strength. This has implications for global political priorities. We must rethink our positions. Until the 19th century, India and China were the world's main economic powers. During the past decades, Asia has once more been the locus of spectacular growth in world trade. Japan emerged early as an economic power, quickly followed by the Asian tigers and China. Today, India, China, Japan, Indonesia, and South Korea are all in the G20, and soon the biggest economies in the world might once again be China and India. According to the World Bank, China will most likely be the largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power by the end of this year. India is already number 3 on this list. Yet, in nominal terms, both the US and the EU are still the global leaders by far, and will remain so for years to come. It is important to remind ourselves of this fact. It helps to keep things in perspective. Trade has increased the interdependence between Asian nations. The 2 studies presented today clearly illustrates this fact. For instance, we find that more than half of Asia's trade and over 40% of global value chain flows in Asia are intra-regional. This is a significant shift from earlier, when Asian economies were driven by exports to other parts of the world. Parallel to Asian economic growth, the number of free trade agreements and multilateral partnerships is growing and becoming a spaghetti ball of overlapping arrangements, to borrow a phrase from Professor Park. Currently, there are 71 free trade agreements in the region, and several new ones are under negotiation. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is expected to be finalized by 2015. However, it is unclear how this will play out alongside the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is also under negotiation. And it remains to be seen how both of these might affect the overall conditions for economic activities in the region, as well as positions in the WTO negotiations. The spaghetti ball of free trade agreements increases the need for stronger global regulatory arrangements. I am encouraged by the outcome of the Bali WTO meeting, which gives hope of bringing the Doha process back on track. In order to ensure a predictable environment for our interests in Asia, a strong multilateral order led by the United Nations must be maintained. Norway is a firm supporter of ongoing institutional development in the region. In our view, the activities of the UN and the Asian regional integration efforts can be mutually beneficial. Norwegian economic interests in Asia are complex and affect many sectors. Professor Park and Mr. Melchior will paint a more detailed picture, but I would like to outline a few points. And also just a reference, about a month ago I was in Bangkok speaking at the Norway Asia Business Summit. And the broad participation and interest, especially from different sectors of Norwegian commercial life, clearly show how important Asia is for Norwegian business interests. Today, more than 425 Norwegian companies have a presence in Asia. They employ almost 50,000 people. They trade within the Asian markets and they trade across borders with the Asian markets. The gradual changes taking place in the Norwegian economy are reflected in our trade with Asia. Changing trade and investment patterns link Norwegian capital, technology and competence directly to the Asian markets and to their strategic sectors. China, South Korea and Japan are our most important export markets in Asia. Over the past 10 years, Norwegian export to ASEAN countries have increased by 178%. The fact that Norway has become an investor nation affects our outlook on the world and how the world views us. The government pension fund Global now holds more than 1% of the world's listed company shares, and 17% of the fund is invested in Asia. Technology and fisheries are important sectors for trade with Asia, and our raw materials exports are significant, including oil. Growing maritime and offshore industries in Asia present us with new opportunities. Our expertise and technology in these fields complement the region's industrial demands. As the oil age is peaking, developing our knowledge-based industry will become increasingly important. We must seek to forge effective partnerships with the vibrant, knowledge-intensive communities that are being established in Asia. We must invest in knowledge and innovation if we are to maintain our competitive edge in the global economy. The basis for securing Norwegian interests abroad, including our economic interest, is an active and strategic foreign policy. The government will maintain a focus on active diplomacy and political consultations with Asian countries. Norway has long-standing good relations with Asian countries. Over the years, we have facilitated conflict resolution efforts in a number of Asian countries, and we have made a substantial contribution to ISAF, as well as providing humanitarian and development assistance in Afghanistan. Increasingly, we now meet our Asian partners in the fields of development and conflict resolution on their own continent. China, South Korea, India and Japan take a direct interest in both the Arctic and the Antarctic region. Last year, we welcomed China along with several other Asian states as a permanent observer to the Arctic Council. This brings major Asian powers closer to our doorstep and creates an opportunity for engaging with them on key issues relating to our national interests. The promotion of universal values is a priority for the government. Good governance, human rights, the rule of law, non-discrimination, and environmentally friendly production are among our main priorities. We will continue to discuss these matters with governments and regional organizations in Asia. Norway is actively seeking to develop a closer partnership with ASEAN. ASEAN is the most closely knit organization for cooperation in Asia and a strategic center of gravity in the region. And although all the other sub-regional arrangements are slowly emerging, none are as well established as ASEAN or have the same degree of convening power. Our membership in ASEM gives us access to a platform dialogue between the EU and more than 20 Asian countries, and an opportunity to meet regularly in the same room with many of our most important economic partners. Our prosperity and future growth depend on Norwegian companies succeeding abroad, on market access, and on Norway being seen as an attractive country for investments. Economic diplomacy, the promotion of business interests abroad, is vital in this context. Through EFTA, Norway is currently negotiating free trade agreements with a number of Asian countries, including India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. We now have in place a bilateral social security agreement and a tax agreement with India. For many years, there has unfortunately been no movement in the bilateral free trade negotiations with China because of the strained relations between Norway and China. It is in our interest to normalize our political relations with China. However, this will take time, and there are no easy solutions, as has been illustrated in recent weeks. Due to our engagement in the region, Norway needs to develop greater analytical expertise on Asia. We are seeking to create incentives for building expertise and knowledge about Asia in Norway. Increasingly, knowledge-intensive communities are being established in Asia, both in the fields of innovation and technology, and of regional and global affairs. We must keep abreast of development and seek to forge strong partnerships with relevant institutions. In Foreign Minister Brende's foreign policy address to the Norwegian Parliament, Stortinget, on 25th of March 2014 this year, he stressed that the government will step up the pace of its efforts to promote Norway's business interests internationally. To further this aim, we are establishing a new department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that will bring together business promotion, economic diplomacy, energy, and development policy. In closing, let me thank Professor Park and the highly capable team at NUPI for 2 valuable reports and for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. The pull of the Asian economies is not without political ramifications. Asian states have an interest in translating economic power into political power, nationally, regionally, and globally. We welcome this development, but at the same time we must make sure that our own interests are aligned accordingly and are effectively upheld. Our economic and trade interests in the region must be given high priority. Having said this, we must not neglect the wider political developments in the region or our deeply rooted Norwegian values and policies, such as maintaining an international framework based on the rule of law, human rights, and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morten Høglund. This was a very good overview of some of the developments in Asia and also some of the challenges rising for Norway. There will be an opportunity. He has kindly offered to be here to take questions and participate in a Q&A session, but we will do that after we first have a presentation by Arne Melchior, and then the 2 of them together will sit up here, and then we open the floor for a discussion. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Arne Melchior, who is a senior researcher at NUPI and who's been in charge of this writing these reports that was presented here today. So Arne, please. And there will be some PowerPoint thing, but you take care. Okay.
Okay, so it's on. Very good. So thank you very much. The information department said they would be coughing when there is 5 minutes left, but to be sure I should put this on. see it works. Yeah, so I will present mainly the report from the project, which has the title Norway, Asia, and the global value chain, Asia's growth and Norway's links to Asia. So I'll present this report later. Professor Park will present a study on RTAs, regional trade agreements. So I will not speak much about that. My co-authors here are here too. Jo Tore Lind from NUPI and the University of Oslo, and Christine Emilie formerly from NUPI, now also at the university. So this project, as you know, was funded by the MFA. It is a broad and comprehensive study because the terms of reference, the call for proposal, was very extensive. I mean, many areas were to be covered with about 4.5 months of work divided by involving 5 people. So we worked hard for some months to create this report and the working paper. Actually, the last time we did something similar was in 1997 for the Ministry of Finance. And there is a special issue of International Politik from 1997. It's kind of interesting, fun to read because there are some kind of similarities 17 years later. The country focus here is on the RCEP group of countries, the ASEAN plus China, Japan, Korea, and then Australia, New Zealand, India. So that involves Australia and New Zealand, which is sometimes not considered as Asia but Oceania. But the country group, so it's Asia plus these two. And often we include Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan because they are kind of national entities within the region. So we include them in some of the statistics. So there is a lot of statistics in the appendix. It's meant to be of use to people working more specifically on the countries. And there is actually a wealth of information in the report, and I'll present some key points here. First, let me just say that this study is a kind of comprehensive, with focus on the economic links, economic developments, that doesn't pay kind of respect to the enormous variety. We do some analysis of the variety, and this graph shows the income levels, the GDP per capita, for some of the Asian countries here, and from some Western European EEA countries here. And you see that in per capita income levels, there is a huge dispersion in Asia. So in Europe, it's more even. So here in Asia, you have some very poor countries and some countries that have climbed the ladder and become relatively rich. So there's huge dispersion in levels, but if you also consider country size, that's also an element. So you have China and India, of course, as the giants of the regions, and the country size differences are also very large. So that matters, of course, for the political integration and cooperation in the regions. For the growth patterns in the report, we show there is some income convergence. So on average, the poorest countries have grown faster. And the growth predictions by the IMF and others suggest there will be continued convergence because the expected growth rates are higher in the poorer nations. So it's a kind of harmonious expectation and harmonious recent past, although with some countries having troubles. And of course, we don't pay respect to the challenges of many countries with setbacks, etc., and variation, political issues, etc. So for China, it's expected that growth will slow down because you cannot grow with 10% per annum for too many decades. So this is expected in all projections to slow down by the World Bank. The 2030 report is expected to slow down to 5% by 2030. But in spite of this, Asia will continue to grow and rise in importance because it's kind of half the world is catching up, and that will increase its share of the world economy. So this, everybody have, of course, heard about Asia's fast growth. It's half the world in terms of population. This share has actually been quite stable over the last couple of decades. But there is a hierarchy, and in the discussion, the most frequently we hear about the trade and GDP. So the share of Asia in world GDP is 30–34%, depending on if it's purchasing power parity adjusted or not. For trading goods, it's 28%, a bit higher for exports than for imports. So these shares are very high, but they are smaller for services, for inward FDI, and for outward FDI. So these are kind of development related. And it's important to kind of notice the nuances in the picture here, because Asia is not a giant in all fields. So, for example, in outward FDI, it's still modest, but it's on the rise. So the growth is well known, as also mentioned by the State Secretary. The intra-Asian trade actually grew faster than exports to other regions. From 70 to 2010, this has been the case. So Asia has been the manufacturing workshop of the world, exporting to the others, but intra-Asian trade has grown even faster throughout the period, more or less. From 4 to 13% of world trade is the intra-Asian trade growth in the period. It's different from Europe in one sense. It's similar, of course, in the sense that intra-regional trade is large and massive. It's different, for example, from the former Soviet area, where the intra-regional trade is very low and it's not growing so fast. But the difference is that in Europe, you were exchanging final goods, cars for cars, for example, clothing for clothing. In Asia, you are exchanging car parts for final products to a large extent. And the final products are more often exported outside the region, but there is an extensive trade in components and therefore strong value chains in the region. And these value chains, they are based on investment and multinationals, but also on what's called non-equity forms. So, for example, the clothing industry of Asia, you also often had national firms, but they had relations to international companies that made the designs, had the marketing apparatus, etc. So, but you still had national industry. So it's not only FDI, but also NEF is an important aspect of the structure. So the decline of the West is, of course, the kind of flip side of the coin of Asia's growth. And if you look at the GDP and you look at trade, you see the shares of Western Europe and the shares of USA, especially USA in the last 10 years, are falling rapidly over time. So it depends a bit on how you measure it, purchasing power or not, etc. But this is very clear. Last 10 years, there was also a growth for other regions, all the other Latin America, Africa, etc. But this picture is not similar in all fields. So there are some kind of differences which we illustrate in the report. And so, for example, for FDI, it's a bit mixed. You see here that the share of the USA fell, the share of Asia, this is outward FDI. So the share of Asia rose, but the share of Europe actually rose during the period. So there was not the kind of strong decline. This is, of course, if you present this to Americans, they will say, oh, but this includes intra-European trade investment. So, of course, it's driven partly by the intra-European FDI. But this is a bit different from the pattern you see for GDP and trade. This is even more so for finance, where you, for example, the USA is still a big boy and expanding rapidly over the last decade in other forms of investment than FDI, portfolio investment, etc. Yes, so there is an aggregation issue here about how you present data with intra or European, etc. But so there are some nuances about trade in value added, and the basic issue is, of course, that you have double counting in gross trade because of trade in components and inputs. So there are some famous studies showing that the value added component of the final price of electronics made in China is actually very low. It can be lower than 10%. So there is a study for iPod and others have come. So, so how much of your exports is made in other countries? So this is, of course, well, it's important to kind of correct because it can give a biased perception, especially for bilateral trade flows. You may get an erroneous picture. For example, if a lot of China's exports is actually made in Japan, it's kind of the perception of trade relations is a bit blurred. So the trade deficit with China is exaggerated and is lower if you correct for these trading components. So they made new databases at the OECD WTO, the Trading Value-Added Database, the World Input-Output Database from a research product. UNCTAD has made a more comprehensive base. This is a difficult data exercise, and I will not go into details, but it's tricky to make this World Input-Output table. But here you see an output from the OECD data. You see Norway here is a commodity or raw resource-based producer. We don't have so much, small country, not so much production of final goods. So a very small share of our export is made abroad, but it is 15% even for Norway. Large countries like the USA, very small share. But here on the top you find Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, China, Hong Kong, etc. So you see, for Singapore, half of the export is made abroad. So that's the value chains. So these value chains, so what determines these export rates? As I said, it depends on country size. So large countries have more production of their own inputs. It depends on the role in the value chains. If you make raw materials, you make them yourself. But if you make radios or assembly production, you will have a larger share of imported inputs normally. And of course, it depends on FDI, the role of multinational companies, and even the non-equity forms of involvement. For Norway, it's important to add that this is not only a matter of goods, but also services. So in the final price of the iPad or iPod or whatever, there is a big chunk of services. And actually, Norway has always been very strongly involved in the Asian value chain through services, especially because of shipping. So we didn't make the cars, but we transported it. And even before we made the oil ourselves, we were transporting oil. So Norway has been linked to the value chain through services. Value chains imply that purely national industries have become more rare. So industrial development is more interconnected. Countries are interconnected, and sectors are interconnected. So, for example, for Norwegian shipping in the USA, the main concern about TTIP may not be to get market access for shipping as such, but how does the TTIP affect trade in general? Because if there is more trade, they will demand more shipping. So you have the intersectoral effects. For services, especially the intersectoral effects are huge. And of course, for assembly production, you have these kind of links. So as I said, perceptions, welfare assessments are really affected by these new calculations. It's important for industrial policy to be aware of these linkages. Trade policy can be different in the sense that you risk, if you're connected to international networks, protection may harm yourself to a greater extent than before. Rules of origin matter, of course, strongly if you have very large parts of the product made abroad. And then there are all these broader aspects of multinationals and global governance. So if more of the activities takes place through multinationals, they can relocate production, etc. And to some extent income, it matters, of course, for the economy and its governance. Yeah, so that's the kind of background, Asia and the value chains. So how is Norway located in this picture? So, of course, we are geographically far from Asia, so we tend to have more trade with Europe. So then, of course, the shares with Asia are kind of normally expected to be a bit lower than Asia's share in the world economy. Here you see Asia in the Norway total, 2010 to 12. And you see it's 16% for goods imports, 11 to 13% for turnover from Norwegian FDI abroad, the government pension fund global, the FDI outward stock and even services exports. Whereas it's smaller for services imports, goods exports, and partly because of oil is directed to Europe, and the FDI inward stock. And if we compare to the pattern I showed earlier for Asia, you see that we are kind of lower, but that's to be expected. But this is a normal thing. We don't, and you see that for example, for outward FDI, Norway is relatively high because the gap is smaller to inward FDI would be the corresponding picture for Asia. So yeah, so in the report there is data on all these things, the trends over time, what you like, so you can study it more. This is the kind of endpoint into recent years. So on the whole, the picture is that Norway has kept up with the Asian mirror. We have not been kind of left behind with shrinking shares, etc. So if you look here at goods trade first, you see that I mean the trend then means that Norway's shares, Asia's share in Norway's trade is increasing, and Norway's share in Asia's reported trade is about stable. So that's the overall pattern. So here is Norway's share in Asia's trade. You see it's kind of some fluctuations, but on the whole, relatively steady. I included here, we don't have a full analysis of post 2010 trade and issues with China, but here you see Norway's share of China's trade in goods, where you see that for Norwegian exports, or Chinese export, which is actually Norwegian imports, there is a falling share after 2010. There was a big peak here in China's imports, equivalent to Norway's exports, and a fall after 2010. So there is some cyclicality here. So you don't find out everything about the potential complications of trade by just comparing this and this. We don't present the kind of full statistical analysis, but we observe that there is some fall after 2009. It applies to exports and imports, and for many sectors. So maybe later we will say more about Nobel effects, whatever, but not here. So FDI. The important thing is that FDI, the firms sell more through their affiliates than they do through cross-border trade. So this is something we have seen, for example, for the USA, Norway's relation to the USA. Here is for Asia. So you see that for goods, for 54 billion crowns export, and 66 from affiliates in Asia. Services even sharper, because many services have to be sold via mode 3, that is by affiliates. Even larger share of the trade sales, which doesn't have to be in the countries of investment, could be to other countries in the region or elsewhere. But so you see that it's about 50-50 here with these two parts, but in both cases the affiliate sale is larger than the cross-border trade. So that's a new thing. For exports, you have we have seen machinery, oil, gas, and fish are the biggest sectors. There was extremely fast export growth. Past 7 years here, 14% annually based on constant dollar data. It was very fast. So there was Norway kind of expanded fast. So for FDI, manufacturing is largest for the FDI part. So it's important to recall that it's not only oil and services. Manufacturing actually is important, although the share of Norwegian production has been falling. So services, transport, other business services, travel are the most important for exports. For FDI, we don't have a complete picture. Transport is certainly important. Transport and storage, as it's called. There is probably a lot of IT services. We have Telenor and such activities, but the statistics are incomplete here, so we don't have it all. So for the FDI part, there is a very special characteristic. So this shows, of course, that also for FDI there's been a fast growth. So Norway has kind of followed Asia, but you see here this is a curve for outward. This is the share of Asia in Norway's FDI stock. So this is the outward share. So this is so more and more of our investments goes to Asia. But then you see this curve, which is only Singapore. So you see that almost the whole FDI goes to Singapore. Singapore is also important on the inward, but less so. Here, China, for example, is more important and coming. So there is a Singapore focus in Norwegian in relation to Asia. And here we sum up this kind of regional allocation. Now you have to be coughing. Yes, the the 5 minutes. Yes. So the regional allocation between, I mean, how much is ASEAN, how much is China, Japan, Korea, how much is the third group here, Australia, New Zealand, and India. So you see here the memo item, the shares of world GDP, the comparison of GDP. So, and then you will see that for the trading goods, this is kind of grossly compatible to their economic weights. And for the pension fund, actually so. Even if we show in the report that China, there is more in Japan than China, but for the regions, for the three groups, it's kind of commensurable to the GDP, to the economic size. But you see, for outward FDI, this is very special that you have this focus on ASEAN. As I showed, it's Singapore, which is in the lead. It's a bit weaker, but still present for inward FDI. And it's so then services, which is partly based on FDI, is an intermediate case with a kind of stronger than expected ASEAN focus, but less so than FDI as such. Yes, so so you see that Singapore is here. To make so Singapore is probably a hub for Asia, and we did not examine fully the nature of this holding companies, how much is sold in Singapore to other countries, etc. So it's taxation issues matter, logistics matter. There is a cluster there, so there can be kind of plausible reasons for efficiency reasons for locating in Singapore. Yes, so the implications and policy issues. The call for the study didn't have a very sharp policy focus. So, and many policy issues need further institutional detail to assess. For example, should Norway have free trade agreements with each country or with ASEAN? To answer that properly, you would have to kind of look more into the institutional things, and we didn't have time for that. So the report didn't have a very strong kind of policy focus. It's a broad kind of perspective on Asia, but nevertheless we sum up some broad implications. Yeah, so first is that this general observation that Norway did okay. We followed the Asian miracle, and there is more to come because Asia will grow, even if China growth dampens. Asia is half the world. Continued growth is expected, so Asia will become even more important than it was. Another implication is the terms of trade gain. So from 2000 to 2012, Norwegian export prices rose by 81%. Import prices rose by 11%. So a quick calculation shows if you use 2,000 weights, this is equivalent to 27% of GDP, which is a very nice gift to get. Of course, we cannot, this was not only Asia, but Asia was the main factor, keeping import prices low in Norway and contributing to commodity demand. This will not continue to rise. So we cannot expect 54% over the next couple of decades. And of course, for example, shale gas issue implies that the gas prices are in a new situation. So we cannot expect this to continue the way it was. But it's a kind of very, very significant aspect for the Norwegian economy as a whole over the last decade. The third implication that FDI is more important than trade, so that analysis and policies should take this into account. yes, you have the value chain perspective, how are countries and sectors related, what is Norway's position. You have a lot of, you can have indirect effects through linkages. You can have an interaction between trade and FDI. For example, firms may invest if trade barriers become high to surpass the barrier. So you can have new interactions and new policy effects because of the interaction. It's another situation compared to the old-fashioned trade policy thinking. And if the firms invest abroad, they are kind of both sides of the flow. And then you have, of course, taxation, incentives, regulatory issues, which are broadly important in an era of strong multinational production. For Norway, this role of Singapore, is it kind of clustering for efficiency reason? Is it because of logistics of Singapore, or is it due to taxation and regulatory reasons? We didn't explore it, but that's, of course, issues of importance. So Norway in the value chain, we are manufacturing, we are part of the Asian circuit in a sense, especially to FDI and for some supply of the component production related to construction, transport sector. Oil and gas, you have supply services related to energy, which is an important aspect, shipping, also important. I will mention here another thing called sometimes by some given the nickname Mode 5, they have Mode 1 to 4 for the trading services, cross-border, and number 3 through FDI, from states abroad, etc., visits in 2 and 4. So that Mode 5 is the kind of used for the situation where goods trade include a services component. That has actually always been the case. So when you import goods, there is a CIF, cost, insurance, freight price, which include transport cost. And this is calculated in the national account. So Norwegian shipping is kind of split out from the calculation, and it's part of our production. But this could be more important in an era of multinational production, and Norway is a small and peripheral nation with more indirect trade. And a lot of things pass through multinational affiliates, etc., trading affiliates, whatever. And so we did in the report also a study on so-called mirror data, where we compared how much trade was reported in Asia compared to how much was reported in Norway. And in general, we find that we import the double of what Asia exports. And that cannot all be transport costs. It has to be data error, or there has to be some price marker for some reason or other. So we make some analysis in the report. I don't have time for details, so this is just an illustration for China. You see that 2.6 means that in 2000, our imports was 2.6 times China's exports to Norway. And here it was even higher. It had a kind of U-shape over time. And here we have decomposed into the quantity effect, which may be kind of data error. China thought they were selling to the Netherlands. So the second component, which is more interesting here, is the price part of it. There was a price marker, and this could be due to real cost or errors in the price report. So this is, you see, this seems to be fluctuating around 40%, and for 12 countries, you find it 37%. So there is not probably not 37% transport cost from Asia. So there is something else here which is interesting to find out. That may actually be European services. So maybe some of our imports from China is actually European services production. So that's the Mode 5 thing which we made a little contribution to analyze. In one part, we'll say more about trade policy and free trade agreements in Asia. I just show you this tree here. That EFTA has 3 agreements here covering, this is share of GDP in the region. And then we have 5 plus 1, the one is China, which has been standing still for a couple of years. So these are the ones under negotiation, will bring the coverage up to 23%. Then you have India and China, no, China and Japan, I mean. And then Australia and the smaller ones. So you see that the current plans and existing agreement cover only a quarter of the region economic size. So if you are to handle the trade policy through FDIs, there is some way left. So we discuss a bit more loosely, but if there is a need for a kind of new master plan for trade policy in a situation where you have a more complex and kind of conglomerate trade system, WTO is very important, still existing, but the reform appetite is not the same after the Doha round negotiation. We don't have a red carpet everywhere for free trade agreements, so we don't cover it all. But it may be this is solved. There is a test of the trade in services agreement is a test of plurilateral intermediate solutions, which could be an option. And the argument here is that if things are changing and you have to use different tools, different approaches, you need a government system which is up to this and which addresses themes and core issues and doesn't spread out too thinly the competencies on, be it investment, be it portfolio, be it services, trade, whatever. So that's also a kind of loose implication of the analysis. So I hope there will not be 17 years until the next study, so thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Arne. I know that they have worked hard, both Jo Torilin and Christine and Arne, and one of the things that it might seem as a simple exercise to map out Norway's relationship with Asian countries, but I think all of them were really surprised when they saw that the data were not readily available, and if you compare data from one source you found one answer, but if you had this mirror data you found a completely different answer, and basically data didn't add up. And that points to probably also following up from what Morten Høglund kind of need to knowledge-based investment into examining our relationship with Asia, but that also includes investing a bit more into the production of data to map out inter-regional, cross-border trade and movements, etc. So this is a big challenge for Norway, but it's part of a greater global challenge, I think, to improve data and to measure different streams. Now we leave the floor open for questions, and these gentlemen are supposed to answer. And Liv, do you have a microphone? Or just stand up? No, we don't have a microphone. So you can just stand up, and please don't be too shy. Just raise your hand and you can identify yourself. Any questions? Yeah, over here, please.
My name is Åse Sand from Norwegian Burma Committee. I would like to raise an issue to Mr. Børge regarding the contrasting interest between human rights, or respect for human rights, and promoting business. For example, Burma or Myanmar. As you know, I've always been a strong supporter of the democracy movement in Burma since the beginning of the 90s. The last years, with the reforms in Burma and Myanmar, it's always become a strong cooperation partner with the authorities in Burma. It's been leading in the international engagement and open up to Norwegian businesses being part of the policy. So Telenor and Statoil have signed important contracts. And at the same time, the opposition and civil society, they were concerned that they feel that they've been forgotten and that Norway has changed side. And also they see that Norwegian companies are getting in, and also that Norway has become more silent on human rights issues. And my question is if the MFA finds this problematic, and how they're going to deal with it.
Please.
Well, thank you for the question. Of course, the balance between raising human rights issues and business interests and other political interests are always there. in quite a lot of countries, and it's not, we don't find it in general difficult to pursue different types of interest in a country, and it's quite natural that we raise human rights issues, concerns, and that we have a business interest. Myanmar is in the process of development, and in that sense we are engaging on a broad and not least in climate issues and poverty reduction, and it's about bringing telecommunications in, and Norwegian companies are involved. From what I understand and the reports I see and the engagement and the talks we have with society in Myanmar and authorities, human rights is not forgotten. Our support of also UN human rights institution, I myself been in Geneva raising these issues, talking about how we, as you know much better than me, the human rights situation in Myanmar is complex. It's a long way to go, and this is, I think, recognized from almost everybody. And we try to play our part in that process. When we speak to Norwegian companies who engage in Myanmar as well as other places, it's always also a message from us in relation to, of course, corporate social responsibility in general abroad, but also specific human rights concern which you need to be aware of. So I cannot say that I'm familiar with the kind of perception that you are bringing up, that this is forgotten on the altar of promoting business interests. But you are right that our relationship with Myanmar in the transition period they are in now have changed from previously, where of course there was no engagement of that sort. Thank you.
Okay. Overhead, please.
Good day. I'm Daniel, the ambassador of Romania to the Kingdom of Norway, and I will start by congratulating you for the excellent report. I hardly can wait actually to have a thorough look on it, but I found that your presentation as being extremely interesting for not only for Norway but also for the other European countries. My question relates actually to a brief reference of your Mr. Secretary of State regarding the historical agreement between Russia and China. Of course, maybe the time is too short for having a thorough analysis on that, but I would highly appreciate your views concerning actually the implication of yesterday's agreement on Norway, on Europe, and maybe why not on European security as such. Thank you.
I think I will be very careful and brief. I use this as an example of how the energy needs, not least of China, demands that they find solutions to that. And we know that negotiations, we understand they have been going on for 10 years and been complicated, and they admit it's been very complicated. Of course, you can, I think others are better placed to analyze the consequences, and I think we have not made a specific analysis relating to this, and it's not any alarm bells ringing. We just, it's been well known for a long time that Russia and China wants to sort this issue out, so it's not a surprise. Maybe a surprise that it took 10 years to come to this agreement. So we are, as you understand and as you know, we don't in general have any issues problems relating to sell our oil and gas on the market. So it's not a specific concern if that was implied. But the geopolitical consequences, I'll leave that to others too.
Can I just do some advertising? We are at NUPI. We are engaged in a huge project that's been going on for for quite some time on the Russia Far East policy, and we are doing this together with partner in Moscow, China, Korea, Japan, and Singapore, looking into the relationship between what kind of basically the Russia Far East policy, and part of this is of course energy integration between China and Russia, and also looking into the implications for Norway. So this is a project that has been running for some time, and so we're happy to invite you back to report more from that later on. But Arne, you had asked, you wanted to add something to this?
No, I just want to mention briefly that we have these project activities, and when you talk about China, Russia, and the agreement, people think only about the gas export. So actually, there is a big thing happening in the trade of Russia and the trade in the whole former Soviet area. Is that as I said, the intra-regional trade is very limited. So the FSU or CIS region is different from Asia, different from Europe, and actually some of the imports of manufacturing and finished final goods is kind of collapsing in the area. So for over 10 years, for example, the imports of Russia from the other CIS countries has gone the share has been reduced sharply, and the share of Asia has gone like that. So there will be an expansion of trade anyway, and it will also be, of course, because of the energy trade, but there is an important structural change taking place.
Okay, thank you. Do I see some other hands? No, okay, no, but please, we have still some time, so please come up with some questions if you have. But let me take one question then, Morten, because two elements. The first is when you say that, okay, you traveled once per month to Asia, and it would be interesting partly to hear where you travel in Asia. If you're right, if Arne is right, you will travel to Singapore, Korea, Japan, yeah, basically, maybe, right? But anyway, so but my question is, when Norway is looking towards Asia, this is not an exercise Norway is doing by itself now. The rest of the world is also looking to Asia. We heard Russia is doing that, but the US is doing it in its pivot to Asia, and Europe is doing it in their way, kind of also trying to pivot to Asia, right? And I just wonder, when you kind of develop a policy in Norway towards kind of strengthening ties with Asia, do we do this together with our European partners? Do we do it together with American partners? Do we do it by ourselves? What is the element of competition? What puts Norway apart from others, and what do we have in common? Could you say something about this? You mentioned briefly this awesome thing that you do together with the European partners, but are you more happy doing things alone, or how do you see this? So are we approaching Asia by ourselves?
Well, being most happy is maybe not how we address this, but what is most relevant, how can we achieve results? And you mentioned ASEM, which is the EU's forum for engaging with Asia, and being a non-EU member, it's important for us to have access to that forum, which is access to a lot of important and relevant people. On the free trade agreement in an EFTA context, and you can say, well, that's basically Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. So that's in that context. In some concrete, like in being diplomatically present by embassy is one visible way to go. We have often, if you look at new projects, but also existing projects, we look at doing this in a Nordic way. But we have specific interests. Our industrial, how we are lined up with the maritime sector, the marine, oil and gas, some in the technological field, it's a little different from, say, Sweden, Denmark, or Finland. We can cooperate on some issues, but we also have specific interests to take care of. So we need to have a Norwegian approach to this. Mm-hmm. Of course, then we need to single out, and it was interesting what was seen, where is the biggest markets and economies, and that's absolutely being done all the time. But to find out where, for the least amount of effort, can we get the most access. But we have to do this on a broad basis, and that's what we're doing. And we're seeing interesting growth figures and interesting opening up in most markets in Asia. So we have ongoing negotiation. I mentioned probably like 5 agreements, and we have the whole ASEAN structure. And you mentioned we'll have plurilateral agreement between us and ASEAN be a possibility. We don't know. The TISA negotiations are going on. So it's very broad-based. But it's also based on continuity, the shipping interest, and Singapore was highlighted. And of course, it's very much because in the shipping sector, Singapore and Norway have the connection that's been there for so many decades, and it's building on something which so. To kind of say that this is a new phenomenon over the 5-10 years, that's oversimplifying things, and it's building on a lot of good trust and relationship building which has happened on a long time. But we are stepping up the efforts, and we are seeing Norwegian industry also stepping up their efforts, and they are asking, at least that's the message we hear, they are asking for a more active government support in this, and that's where we are trying to respond, and also in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that make this a priority in our policy in the ministry to support Norwegian business promotion, not least in Asia.
Okay, I have one more kind of big question, because what we have talked about so far is basically commercial ties, economic ties, and we heard from here on the human rights dimension. But at the same time, there are 2 other big topics going on in Asia that might have implications for Norway, and one of them is security issues. There's some say there's an armament development going on. There's disputes on maritime territories, but also other issues. So it's a tense security situation, and you pointed to yourself that there's a kind of lack of trust in the region. So that's one thing on the security dimension. Is that part of the on the radar somehow for Norway? How do you look at that? And some of these issues might have implications also for kind of global governance related to maritime areas, etc. So we'd like to hear your views on that. But the other part of it is that some of these Asian countries, and particularly the big ones, are becoming very important in global governance, in addressing global issues on climate politics, on making international institutions function, etc. So they are kind of politically important, not only for the ties between Norway and Asia, but for global governance. And it would be interesting to hear your views and strategies and thinking about how Norway is kind of lining up with these Asian countries in promoting global governance issues. How do you see them? What are your experiences, expectations? Some academics say that they are disappointed somehow, that arguing that some of the Asian countries are too little concerned about global affairs. How do you have a policy towards engaging them, for instance?
Well, we are engaging on these issues all the time, and I had a meeting yesterday with a representative from one of the Asian countries, and we were discussing the situation in Ukraine, and we were very happy that we had similar reading of the situation. And it's not so that we necessarily have the same speaking points for every country. It will depend on, and where we have mutual interest, where we see that we can benefit from cooperating, we do so, and especially on the climate issue, it's a very important issue for us to promote some results and some progress towards the meeting in Paris next year. And of course, this is we attach a lot of importance to that. It can be on Afghanistan, it can be on different things. In the security policy sphere, I would say that the Law of the Sea Convention, which is so important for Norway, not least in our own region, but also for our shipping interests globally, the respect of the law of the sea, which is very often a talking point in meeting with the Asian partners. So some of these issues, also on the security side, directly reflect on our own interests. but the list on global issues, and it is absolutely not forgotten. I would say on the contrary, and what we see is, and I think I mentioned this, I made a reference to it, when the commercial links between us and Asian partner become stronger, there is also a tendency to cooperate more on other issues of global importance, whether it be arms reduction or the security resolution 1325 on women and different aspects on broad human rights issues and so on and so on.
Okay. Okay, I think that I don't see any more questions. So I think that you are all eager to have a cup of coffee. I would like to thank Morten Høglund for his participation and comments and remarks. I think they were very well taken, and also I'd like to thank Arne Melchior for his presentation of the report. I think there are some copies of the report out there. If there are, no one left, you could of course download this from our webpage for free. On that note, I'd like just to thank you all and then invite you for a cup of coffee. It's going to take place here, and then we resume again in 10 minutes. So we should bring in some air and then have a cup of coffee. And thank you so much.
If you would like to find your seats, please, we will start in a couple of minutes. And please move into the center of the room.
여기 앉을 거예요? Introduce you before you start.
Okay, I think we are about ready to start the second session. If you could please take your seats. So for the second session, we are very happy to have some of our collaborators from Asia, great experts on the Asian area. First is Professor In-won Park, who wrote the second sub-report that we submitted. Professor Park is a professor of international economics at the Korea University. And he has working on, so he has then written the report on free trade agreements in Asia. This is a topic he has been working on for several years and is among the best experts in the world, so we were very happy to have him on board to talk about this. His research focuses on regionalism, globalism, trade liberalism, trade liberalization, economic integration, international economics more in general. He has a very impressive vita with a large number of books, contribution to books, journal articles, and so on. So we are very happy to welcome Professor In-won Park.
Okay, thank you, and good morning. Let me start my presentation expressing my sincere thanks to NUPI and especially for Arndt for giving me a chance to participate in this interesting research project and giving me a chance to visit Norway. So as you can see from this slide, I'm going to report the working paper I contribute to this project titled as Regional Trade Agreement in East Asia. In this working paper, I focused two things, just overview the RTAs in East Asia and trying to find a prospect for the future. And then that's what I'm going to do. And this is my contact numbers for our future communication. If you have any further information needed or any comment, then just you can use those contact numbers. And today I'm going to present two parts. Actually, since I'm here for live performance, I prepared for anchor song, so which is not in my working paper. Most of my time will be allocated to access East Asian countries' effort to liberalize the regional market by cooperating with each other, which is main topic in this working paper, and you can download from this website. And secondly, actually the first part of my working paper is focusing on evaluating the desirability of RTAs in East Asia. But the second part, which is in work in progress, I attempted to investigate the probability of forming East Asian RTAs. I just compared which one is more feasible, okay, not only for desirable. It is kind of first attempt to quantitatively evaluate the possibility of forming RTAs in East Asia. That website is you can download this draft from that website, but it is still not completed yet. So today, if I have time, I'm going to just introduce, okay, what I have done. So today's presentation will cover the following the content. First, I'm going to overview the RTAs in East Asia, then trying to find why it happened, then just characterize the main findings from the proposed and existing RTAs in East Asia. Then whether it is desirable for our members, either ASEAN Plus 3 or ASEAN Plus 6. Then lastly, we're trying to find where to go. Just looking for, just investigating the desirability, and if it is possible, trying to find which one is more feasible. So as you can see from this slide, there is a remarkable dramatical change over the last 20 years in East Asia in the RTA formation. Until 1990s, in East Asia, only 3 RTAs implemented, very insignificant, meaningless RTAs. One is AFTA in 1976 among the countries in South Asia and North East Asia. And the second, Laos-Thailand PTA in 1991. Those 2 PTAs not very effective at this time. Only the distinguishable RTAs at this time was the ASEAN Free Trade Area, including 10 ASEAN members, launched in 1993 and completed in 1997. And then 20 years later, as of October 2013, we do have 71 RTAs implemented and 7 RTAs signed but not effective. Okay, so table 1 and appendix table 1 in this working paper was carefully surveyed the RTAs by scope and by status. So I'm not going to explain it, so you can check it. And then let me briefly overview the current change in RTA formation in East Asia. As you can see from this, the blue colored one is for worldwide, the ASEAN Plus 6 countries' activities in forming the RTAs or proposing the RTAs. And then red one is the world average. As you can see from that, the blue, the red bar and the blue lines. The blue lines is kind of a number of RTAs among the countries in ASEAN Plus 6, and then the red bar is the average RTAs formed in the world. So you can just compare the recently, since the late 1990s, the East Asian RTAs are much more active than the average of world behavior. And then I just classified what happened in this world, why the East Asian countries suddenly changed their policy stance for favoring multilateralism to the regionalism. So number one, in the early 1990s, as I mentioned, there's only one effective ASEAN RTAs, which is the AFTA. Then since the financial crisis in East Asia in late 1990s, Northeast Asian countries, including China and Japan and Korea, realized that we need a friend, nearby friend. So they just changed their policy stance from supporting the worldwide globalization, like a multilateral institution like WTO, to favoring for its own regional trade agreement, okay, which is mainly for bilateral agreement or sometimes plurilateral RTAs to overcome or to revitalize the East Asian economy, okay, by helping each other. Then Another important factor to triggered the proliferation of RTAs in East Asia has been some slow progress or some stalled progress in worldwide movement toward liberalization, like WTO's DDA and the APEC's Protocol. Those two important multilateral negotiation has not been very successful. So respond to that, the East Asian countries, including the Pacific economies, proposed kind of a region-wide RTAs, which is FTA, Free Trade Area of Asia Pacific. Then recently, U.S. strong the policy, Pivot Asia policy, initiated the expansion of P4 and the PA to TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So that's the another change in environmental change in this region. Then as a reaction to this TPP kind of challenge coming from Pacific economies, so China simply changed their strong support for only Asia to including some expanding that ASEAN plus 3 RTAs to ASEAN plus 6, so-called RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement among the ASEAN plus 6 countries. That RCEP was kind of expanded Asian RTAs, which has been strongly supported by Japan to compete against the Chinese dominance in this region. But China just support ASEAN plus 3 and the Japan support ASEAN plus 6, but both of them simply cooperate with each other to against that idea of TPP. So that is kind of evolutionary change in the RTA negotiation in East Asia. Okay, by the change in the market environment. And recently, regarding that global crisis, even TTIP, the trade and investment, transatlantic trade and investment partnership agreement between Europe and the Americas. So this is kind of a recent change in our commercial policy in this world. So finally, because of those proposed RTAs at this time in Asia Pacific region, we do have this kind of map of RTAs. We do have RCEP, including 16 nations, and originally we do have AFTA, ASEAN 10 nations, and we do have TPP, including 12 countries. Recently, Korea declared our interest to join the TPP, so possibly 13 or 14, but currently we do have 12 nations, and that TPP has a route from the P4, Singapore, Brunei, Chile, and New Zealand. So P4 just extend to the TPP. Then there is a very strong proposal to form a Northeast Asian FTA, CJK FTA, including China, Korea, and Japan. And currently we do have 5 different sets of ASEAN plus 1 FTA. That means China, ASEAN, Korea, ASEAN, Japan, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN, India, and ASEAN. So ASEAN as a hub. So this is, so currently we do have only 2 implemented the FTAs in this region AFTA, and 5 sets of ASEAN plus 1, and India is separated. So this is the current map of RTAs in East Asia. And this slide simply provide a different aspect of characterizing the RTAs in East Asia. Green one is FTA, including FTA, that means the Asia Pacific countries. Then the purple one is TPP, and the red one is RCEP, and the brown one is CJK. As you can see from this matrix, there's some very inactive participation of RTAs between Pacific countries and the Asian countries. And then some of the Asian countries are very active here. Actually, the number of axes in each matrix, each box simply indicate number of LTAs the pair of countries has formed at this time. Okay, so many here, okay, very less here, right? So there's no strong connection between the Asian side of the economies and then the Pacific side of the economies. Okay, so that is the one problem. And another one is this one. Northeast Asian countries, among the China, Japan, and Korea, no cooperation. Okay, so that is the another kind of member-specific characteristics we can find from the RTA in East Asia. So looking just based on those observations, I simply classified the reason behind the proliferating RTA in East Asia into 4 different factors: regional factors, global factors, internal factors, and external factors. So regional factors include the regional countries' different interests. Actually, since the financial crisis in late 1990s, the Korea's very strong driving force for globalization, and China and Japan's leadership competition, and ASEAN's attempt to be a hub of RTA simply triggered this kind of proliferation regionally. And global factors, as I mentioned earlier, some failure of a multilateral effort to liberalize the trade and investment relations. And internally, as An emphasized, the East Asian production networks are deepening. So we need to have some harmonization or cooperation to enhance the economy efficiency coming from different production networks. So that is one more important factor. And unlike the European countries, there are some lack of political wills and cultural diversity in East Asia. So until before the 1990s, most of the cooperation between countries in Asia has been performed by profit interest, that means market-driven interest, rather than forming an institutional approach like forming the RTA. But that has some problems. So currently we are trying to change from market-driven cooperation to institutional-driven cooperation. That's why we do have the proliferating RTAs. Another one is some countries are using this kind of external pressure to persuade domestic the resistance for reform. So that can be another important internal factor to pursue this kind of proliferating RTAs. And the external factors like Europe and the US policy change for pivot to Asia policy change also contributed to this proliferating RTAs. So I'm not going to, this is for emphasizing the interdependence, the product networking, deepening product networking in East Asia. And from our evaluation, I've simply summarized what the main characteristics of East Asian RTAs. As of October 2013, most of the RTAs in East Asia are very relatively new after the financial crisis. Okay, so 94.7% of RTAs have been implemented and signed after 1997, and most of the RTAs we are dealing with are bilateral rather than plurilateral or multilateral. And then there's no difference between intra-regional partnership or inter-regional partnership because of development in innovation technologies and the transportation technologies. So distance doesn't matter. Okay, and the other one is overlapping. In East Asia, the RTAs have been very seriously overlapped, worrying about spaghetti ball phenomena. Okay? As an example, 5 sets of ASEAN plus 1. Okay? So if I summarize, Asian countries have changed their trade policy from unilateral for their export promotion policy a long time ago. Then since the financial crisis, moved to the regional bilateral or plurilateral RTAs. Then since that the global crisis, the Asian countries are moving toward a megalateral or multilateral region-wide RTA. So this is kind of a trend. So this is the evidence. Then let me briefly evaluate whether we are good friends, we are good partners to marry. Okay, so theoretically, I selected the following conditions for desirable RTA, which may maximize trade creation effect and minimize diversion effect. So market size matters, tariff structure matters, and then the industrial structure and trade structure and geographical distance and level of economic development. Those may affect the welfare effect of RTAs on countries in East Asia. So following tables simply provide whether those three countries are very good partners for the formation of RTAs. So I'm not going to just explain the detail, but regarding the market, there are many, as I told you, the 8 conditions I used to evaluate the RTAs in East Asia. That means the East Asian, the potential members may not satisfy all the necessary conditions, but most of them will be satisfied. So in general, we can say we are a good partner to marry, but there are many other things to consider, like political problems and conflict in territory things, history things, so many things. Excluding that, if I just consider the economic conditions, we are a good partner, but unfortunately, so far there is no progress. So I'm not going to explain it. Then one more thing. I just compared the current situation of RTAs and kind of a potential situation and expansion situation. So currently we do have ASEAN Hub, and there is some debate about competition between Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, AFTA versus CJK, and there is a possibility of extension of these RTAs. So I just used the computer vision model analysis, and we found that ASEAN Hub policy, the case, and then AFTA versus CJK FTA may not be a Pareto superior condition, because if we do have this kind of RTAs, there is somebody which may lose the welfare. Okay, so but if we move to the ASEAN Plus 3 or ASEAN Plus 6, then we may have some Pareto. When we move to Pareto superior condition, nobody will lose, everybody will get. So this is the case. So this is some more detailed evaluation. And then this is written literature. If I just provide my own research, you may not believe. So I just surveyed the others' work. Then they compare 2 different expansion, ASEAN Plus 6 and ASEAN Plus 6. So all of them agreed to support bigger the better. Okay, so ASEAN Plus 6 will be better than ASEAN Plus 3. So this is recent work. And then Asian track is ASEAN Plus 6, like RCEP, TPP track, and FTAP is Asia Pacific. Okay, so wider the better. So you can just get some quantitative the analysis. So that is the desirability. So we are trying to move toward region-wide FTAs. So RCEP and TPP, FTAP are very hot debatable issues at this time in the Asia-Pacific region. Then lastly, why are we moving to this megallateral or multilateral integration? Okay, so I just observed some new evidence. Okay, first we have to worry about spaghetti ball effect in Asia. Rather than spaghetti ball, we used to use the noodle ball effect. Okay, so that is the complicated web of overlapping RTAs. And also, as emphasized, the value-add trade is much smaller than the total trade, so we have to worry about it regarding that production networking. And also, we found that our partnership is very good, so we may be a natural trading partner. Why don't we utilize this opportunity? But still, there is very lower utilization of FTAs, so why? Okay, so to solve this problem, what are you going to do? Okay, so I may propose the following the policy recommendations, wider and deeper. First, we should follow the expansionary evolutionary path. So after 5 ASEAN plus 1 FTAs will be merged together, then we're going to go for RCEP or TPP, then finally go to the FTAP. Very desirable, but I don't know whether it is feasible. And inside that, to solve that the spark phenomenon, then we have to cooperate with multilateral liberalization. So when you talk about long time ago, we used to debate whether the RTA is a stepping stone or some the stumbling the block. But that is kind of membership problem. But this multilateralization is talking about relations between RTAs. How can you harmonize the RTAs? So to harmonize RTAs, to enhance the economy efficiency, we should consider some diagonal accumulation or some simplifying the rules of origin, those things. So that those should be considered. So to achieve that, I compare the currently activating debate, RCEP and TPP. So plus is positive, negative, ambiguous, positive, negative, ambiguous. So RCEP is very good to compromise between Chinese-led FTA, and then CEPA is Japanese driven RTA, so we're going to just combine together ASEAN plus 3, ASEAN plus 6. Then this RCEP is more open than other RTAs, and we're going to just expect some more additional gains coming from regional production networking. Those are the positive the factor to pursue the RCEP. But negatively, ASEAN can be a driver for this one, but you know the ASEAN way is very inefficient, so we may not support that ASEAN centrality, so that is a problem. And also there is some wide gap in the members, potential members in the RCEP. So and also there is some challenge between the ASEAN, Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. TPP is quite good, high-level TPPs, rule setting, but that may split Asia into different developed Asian members and developing Asian members, and also negotiation behind the closed doors. So first mover advantage will be very strong. So the followers may not be very happy to join, okay? And then whether it can be a building block or stumbling against FTAP, so okay, there can be the problems. And then anyway, this is a desirable picture, okay? So we're going to combine both together and then move to the FTAP. Then for this one, I proposed some strategy. So library can be an important instrument to drive these two region-wide RTAs merged. So for that, ASEAN should complete the ASEAN Economic Community by 2015, and Northeast Asian should have CJK FTA. Before that, the Korea-China FTA is a key factor for the CJK FTA, and regional cooperation, okay, for political and cultural linkages are necessary. Then actually I just spent all the time. Let me have just 2 minutes. This is kind of the argument against East Asian regionalism. Unlike the European integration, East Asian regionalism purely market-driven, where political will and cultural diversity can be impediment to the formation of East Asian RTAs. So I try to quantitatively, okay, prove whether this statement is true or not by using kind of qualitative Tobit regression analysis. So I'm not going to use this one. Just what I found is that the interdependence of RTA formation has been very strong and significantly driven by the deepening of social-political linkage. Social-political linkage has been measured by here political ties and some cultural affinity. Okay, so there are the index I developed. Then we found that those things are very important. Okay. Then what happened? I just applied. So In this, okay, this is formation of RTAs, economic characteristics, cultural ties, affinity and political ties, and this is third country effect. I use this one, and then skip. Finally, this is the possibility, the probability of forming an RTA. Okay, but this is just based on the benchmark period, so it looks great, but it's not true. Absolute value is here, like this. Okay? So RCEP and TPP less than 20% of probability to be realized. Okay, so but the CJK, CKJK, that means formation of RTAs among the Northeast Asian countries are quite strong. But unfortunately, we do have some conflict. So recently, I'm doing a project to evaluate, quantitatively evaluate the impact of conflict on RTA formation. But it is still a work in progress, so I didn't do that. Yes, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. So there is going to be room for some questions and answers, but the plan is that we first do the two presentations and then we do all the discussion at the end. So now I'm also very happy to welcome senior economist Dong Park. He's a senior economist at the Asian Development Bank in its research department. Before joining the ADB, he had an academic career both in Korea and Singapore, several universities. He has done research on a number of topics related to international economics, to international macroeconomics, to topics related to growth, to foreign direct investments, and more recently also with a more focus on questions of an aging population, and also published his research in a number of books and journals and so on. His topic today is going to be on the aging population in Asia, so we're very welcome. Happy to welcome Professor Dong Park.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction, and also thanks to NUPI for inviting me to present ADB research, and also to give some comments about this recently released report on Norway's trade with Asia and the role of Norway in Asia's production network or value chain. So my presentation will focus primarily on an recent ADB project I led. It's on Asia's population aging challenge. So it's about how Asia's demographic transition towards significantly different, grayer landscape, how that's going to affect Asia's economic growth. So I think it's a good opportunity to present to the Norwegian audience some of the type of research on long-term structural issues that we at the ADB are doing. But before I go on to that, to make my participation at this conference more relevant to the research report, I will make some constructive comments about the report, because I think it's important that that this research report, as good and solid as it is, I think if it just stops at a one report and that as a one-off and it stops, I don't think that's too meaningful. I think perhaps it should be the beginning, right, of more concerted, more continuous NUPI research efforts or programs on Asia issues, because as was widely talked about this morning and emphasized this morning, Asia is growing in relative importance, right, in the world economy and in global trade. And in order for Norway to benefit from Asia's, or continue to benefit rather from Asia's growth, I think Norway and Norwegian policymakers and guided and informed by Norwegian think tanks, in particular NUPI, right, which is the premier economic think tank here in Asia needs at least to continuously be engaged and have at least to generate or at least understand and absorb knowledge about Asia. So I think in that context, I think presenting some Asian Development Bank research on Asia is important, and also starting from this report, Norway, Asia, and the Global Value Chain, seeing that as a beginning rather than the end of some NUPI research on Asia-specific issues. So that's also important, and in that connection, I will suggest some ideas of how to extend this report or make do some further research based on this report. Of course, it won't be a big full-scale report like this. So what I'm thinking of is perhaps some kind of shorter but still nevertheless valuable and useful policy briefs based on, and these are some ideas, some topics, potential topics. I don't know if NUPI does these kinds of smaller, shorter policy briefs. We at the ADB, okay. So I think because we at the ADB research department, we do a lot of these kinds of shorter policy briefs. Some are of course just summary of a bigger projects, but others are independent policy briefs. Anyway, I think just overall, I mean, if you look at the big picture, I mean, if you take a big picture of the report, I think it's a very good report, high quality report. It covers a lot of areas, especially for a report that was completed by 5 people, right, in a matter of few months. And it's also quite rigorous and based on the evidence, on data, and it gives a really good picture of the current state of the economic ties between Norway and Asia, and also suggests some forward-looking future scenarios. And as I talked about, I think it does a pretty solid job of covering the main dimensions of this relationship, of this budding, growing economic relationship between Norway and Asia, and focusing in particular on what is Norway's role in Asia's in global value chains, rather, that is based in Asia, in the Asia-based production network, and also it covers important issues, but under-explored issues, or under-studied or under-investigated issues, such as trade in services, more specifically trade in services between Norway and Asia. I think the focus was on shipping, but I think it can be can and should be broader than that, as I will explain further. And finally, last but not least, because I think economic think tank like NUPI, I think its main purpose or main value added is to provide some concrete, specific policy recommendations for the Norwegian policymakers, and hence the very close ties, right, it seems, between the government and NUPI. So I think here there's I think the bottom line is that the main policy recommendation that emerges from this report is that there is a very loud and clear need for Norway to undertake more proactive, active trade policy vis-a-vis Asia, including some types of plurilateral trade initiatives. So what are some ideas, let's say, for policy briefs that you might build upon this very good report? Perhaps I think most likely as much shorter policy briefs. I'm well aware about this Nobel Prize, Nobel effect, and this political, shall we say, geopolitical problems that Norway and China have had with each other. But I think there is a need to look beyond that and to abstract away from that and to think about assuming that these differences will eventually, well, not eventually, probably in the near future will diminish. These kinds of difficulties will diminish. Explore, start preparing now for this normalization of the relationship, and not just when it suddenly normalizes, then it's already, in a sense, a little too late. But just prepare now, plan now of how Norway can benefit from China's immense economy, and it's still very fast-growing economy. How can Norway benefit from this? How can China benefit from this? Because trade is always a win-win relationship, right? That's the whole essence of a trade. If it's not win-win, if it's not mutually beneficial, there will be no trade. But analyze this a little further instead of just saying, oh, we are stuck with this Nobel Prize effect problem, this political problem, this human rights and this and that. But be more forward-looking and start planning now of how this relationship with China from Norway's perspective can evolve in a more constructive way going forward. Now, the second thing, as I briefly touched upon, was from Asia's viewpoint, and this was, in fact, I was at NUPI last May or so. Yeah, it was May exactly about. Yeah, it's precisely about 1 year ago, and I did a seminar on Asia services sector development, which is another ADB research project that I led. Of course, this is a big structural issue in Asia right now, especially in East and Southeast Asia, which boasts a very relatively well-developed manufacturing sector. Of course, some countries such as Korea, for example, already boasts a world-class, world-beating, or not world-beating perhaps, a world-class manufacturing sector with productivity well above OECD average, but at the same time, services sector that is far less productive. So one of the challenges facing Asia, and also the same problem faces the much bigger economy of China, by the way, a relatively underdeveloped services sector, which is dominated by low value-added services industries and activities. I mean, just to simplify things, just to make it easier for the audience to visualize, things like street vending rather than high value-added services. So how can Norway help Asia make that transition toward more higher value-added services sector, which in turn, of course, will lift the general average productivity of Asia's services sector? Of course, that's the benefit from Asia's side, but of course, Norway, by selling these kinds of high value-added services, I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know how much of a comparative advantage that Norway has in these type of high value-added services, but to the extent that it does, of course, Norway can benefit from. It would be a win-win situation because, of course, what's the solution for Asia in the long run? Of course, the solution is for Asia itself by developing human capital and other necessary ingredients for high value-added services activity for itself to develop these kinds of high value-added services. But that's a long-run solution. That's not going to happen in the short or even medium term. In the short and medium term, just as Asia doesn't have oil, so it imports oil. Asia can benefit, but it lacks rather high value-added services, so it imports them from countries that currently have comparative advantage in them. That would be the advanced economies. Again, to be honest with you, I have no idea what kind or what's the comparative advantage of Norway in that kind of high value-added services. Okay, now thirdly, I think there should be a little more analysis of aid for Asia, especially because I think Norway's primarily economic interest in Asia is trade, even though there's growing investment, especially in Singapore, right, as Arne talked about. But I think that Norway is a big aid donor. Its primary interest in Asia is trade. So I think this kind of aid for trade, right, which is a relatively new initiative, which helps countries builds countries with weak economies and weak institutions and weak governance, build up the necessary infrastructure for trade. This initiative is called Aid for Trade. How Norway can expand that, how Norway can play a bigger role in that, I think that's another possible issue or area worth developing or investigating further. And I think one big demand in Asia, so in order for Norway to benefit from Asia's future growth, I think it makes sense for Norway to take a look at what is Asia's future growth paradigm. What does Asia's future growth landscape looks like? And one big part of that landscape is certainly going to be Asia, as it grows richer, just like advanced countries did before Asia, Asians are going to demand cleaner energy, right? So how can Norway benefit from that while helping Asia? That's perhaps a cleaner energy. Again, I have no idea how strong that is in Norway, but to the extent that Norway does have a cleaner energy infrastructure, cleaner energy technology, that's an area worth pursuing. Again, I think the basis of trade is what's the benefit for the other side, but also what's the benefit for you. And finally, I think this is perhaps not very developed yet, because India is a much smaller economy than China. I mean, people talk about China and India, yeah, but realistically, as of now, India is much smaller than China. Perhaps that's why this issue was hardly mentioned, the economic links between Norway and India. But I think it's important to keep in mind that India is fast growing and it does have a lot of potential. And I think the election results, right, which were just finalized 2 days ago, that gives a further confidence that some tough, difficult, because I mean, whatever one thinks of this new prime minister and his human rights record and all that, he has proven to be a very capable and strong and decisive economic policy maker, and he has been given an overwhelmingly strong political mandate. So he is certainly in a very strong position to deliver the kind of politically tough, painful, but necessary second-generation structural reforms that India so desperately badly needs, which bodes well for India's future growth prospects. And of course, Norway, I think I think one of the things that would benefit Norway is to start thinking about how of course, there are more longer-term structural factors that are favorable to India as well, right? I mean, and that leads directly to my main presentation. But that's India's a relatively young population, right? Certainly, everybody's talking about India's coming or India's window of demographic opportunity, because relative to China, India has a younger population, and in the medium term, that will give a growth advantage to India. I mean, not that we should compare India versus China, but just looking at India alone, its relatively young demographic structure bodes well for medium and future medium-term growth prospects. Okay, so these are my suggestions for policy briefs based on this on the NUPI's just published or just launched report. Now, let me just I think in terms of time constraints and so forth, let me just talk very briefly about this structural challenge facing Asia, which is that of population aging. Let me just say, I think Asia faces many challenges, make no mistake about it. One is very short-term, and well, not short-term, it's medium-term, but it's external. And that challenge is the growth of medium-term growth of the advanced economies. They have declined, right? The US and the European countries and Japan, their growth is not as strong as it was before the global financial crisis, and that looks like a medium-term trend rather than just a short-term cyclical trend. That, of course, has negative implications for Asia, especially export-oriented East and Southeast Asia, right? Countries like China and Korea and so forth. But of course, at the same time, we face a number of internal, homegrown, domestic structural challenges to our future growth prospects. There are many of them, but I think perhaps the biggest one is the fact that we as a continent, we as a region is starting to age, and some parts of our region are aging quite rapidly. Of course, if you look at the past up to now, of course, I think demographics certainly played a big role in Asia's rapid growth. And of course, there's a lot of saying that the relatively young regions right now, such as Africa and the Middle East, are set, or India, looking closer to home, looking closer at Asia, is set to enjoy a big demographic dividend. But I think it's important one big important point here is that this demographic dividend is not automatic. It's a potential dividend. You need good institutions, you need good policies, such as flexible labor markets, to transform that potential dividend into an actual dividend. Countries like Indonesia, they are very rigid, inflexible labor market. So that's clearly an area for reform. If Indonesia wants to benefit from its relatively young population, to how, if it wants to translate that into a demographic dividend. And of course, the same lessons apply to Africa and all these other regions of the world which face a potential demographic dividend. Of course, one of Asia's big successes in the past was that by and large, our region was able to transform that potential dividend into an actual dividend through sound policies such as large investments in education, such as by and large flexible labor markets and so forth. I think, again, well, let me just skip. But I think it's important to note that there's nothing special about Asia's population aging. Our population aging is driven by the same factors that made populations older in other parts of the world, such as Norway or such as other advanced countries, rich countries. I think the one thing that does stand out is that some parts of Asia, particularly East Asia, China and Korea, the exceptional scale and speed of aging, that is perhaps a little bit exceptional. But the general drivers of population aging, nothing special there, same as in other parts of the world. And there is also significant heterogeneity, demographic heterogeneity within Asia. South Asia significantly younger than East and Southeast Asia. So let me just say there are two big strategic challenges that's posed by population aging. What does this all mean for Asia? Well, one big challenge, strategic challenge, is, of course, how do we sustain rapid growth, rapid economic growth in the face of aging, in the face of less favorable demographics? In the past, favorable demographics helped our growth, contributed to our growth, added to our growth. Now, we face a demographic landscape which is going to be significantly different, significantly older. So how do we compensate for this less favorable demographic? Because please remember, we as a region are still a very poor region. We are not Norway, we are not France, we are not even Spain or Greece. We need a lot of growth to lift up our general living standards, and perhaps even more importantly than that, to lift the two-thirds of Asia, two-thirds of the global population, the global poor still live in Asia, to lift these hundreds of millions of Asians out of poverty and into more humane, productive lives. For that, we absolutely need economic growth, rapid economic growth. How do we keep that up in the face of less favorable demographics? That's one strategic challenge. The second strategic challenge is how do we provide adequate, affordable, yet sustainable old age income support for our large and growing elderly population. So we have so the region as a whole is aging, whatever indicator you look at, although there is considerable heterogeneity. Now let me just highlight some of the key features, so the value added of this ADB research on demographic transition, which resulted in this book, as well as it was a special theme chapter of the Asian Development Outlook. Our bank's annual flagship report comes out twice a year in April, and the main report comes out in April, the update report comes out in October. But anyway, what are some, so okay, there are a lot of studies on aging. There are at least many studies on aging, and including many studies on aging in Asia. So what's the value added? One big value added is that we use a micro household survey-based data set called the National Transfer Accounts, and this what this database allows us to is to measure income and consumption, or production and consumption, at each age level, and how these people at this, for example, age 35s, age 37s, age 47, how much do they consume, how much do they earn, how much do they consume? If there's a gap, if consumption exceeds income, how do they finance that? Private transfers from a family, public transfers from government, and it's also consistent with national income accounts. So that allows us to do things like this, labor, income, and consumption at the individual level and at the aggregate level. So I think because my time is up, let me just finish on this note. We also quantitatively estimated what's going to happen to our growth rate as our population ages. So in the past, so this is developing Asia as a whole, the entire region, and for major economies within that region of very different income levels. Korea, very high income country. Of course, India and Philippines, lower middle income countries, and China, probably a middle income country. But now, anyway, in the last 30 years, between 1981 and 2010, on average, each year, favorable demographics, in other words, a relatively young population, added this much to annual growth on average. So for developing Asia as a whole, it's about 0.9% per year. That's not earth-shattering number, right? But neither it is a very negligible number. It's a significant number. Significant, but not earth-shattering, consistent with estimates from most other studies. But now what's going to happen? But we also make forward-looking projections because our population structure is going to change. It's going to be significantly older and grayer. So how is that going to affect economic growth? This is how it's going to affect economic growth. This is 20 years from now, 2011 to 2030. Well, I think it would have been nice if I had both sets of bars on the same chart, but unfortunately I don't. So please bear with me a little. So this is the past 30 years. This is the next 20 years. So as you can see, in some countries, this demographic dividend is going to turn into an outright tax. This demographic, in other words, demographics is going to subtract from rather than add to economic growth. That's certainly evident in Korea, which is the world's fastest aging country, but also in a country like China, where there's a real worry, widespread worry about are we going to get old before we get rich? But also in relatively young countries such as India and Philippines, the demographic dividend is still going to be positive because they're still relatively young countries, but it's going to decline. So Asia really has a big task ahead of it. Of course, Asia, we don't want to be too pessimistic because there are many policy options for addressing this. For example, addressing and encouraging and mobile and giving the capacity for women, right, to work more, right? In other words, increase the labor participation of women, encouraging older workers, and there are many other positives. So this is not just a thing. Yes, it's a challenge, but it also opens up many more opportunities that can make Asia achieve more inclusive growth that benefits all of Asians, just rather than just limited groups of Asians. Of course, that is, of course, the ultimate aim of our bank, our multilateral development bank. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the both the very good comments to the report. Were very both insightful and illuminating, and the interesting overview of your research on aging. So now we have some 20-30 minutes for some questions and discussion and so on. So first of all, maybe if you have any comments to each other's discussions, do you want to say anything? Do you disagree with each other? Or should we just leave it to the floor and
Yeah, just
then Arne?
I can ask a question to follow up trade agreements on the extent of rivalry. Because it's a concern about the TPP is, of course, the division of high-income developed and developing countries in Asia, and of course the possible containment effect as is fared in China. So when you speak to Americans about it, they say maybe China will join. It's not a problem, but so I guess there is a big debate in Asia. So can you say a bit more about the sentiments in Asia about having an agreement not including China, etc.? Because now you said Korea might join, has expressed the intention to join TPP. Is it likely that China will follow, or will this be a kind of contagious issue for a while?
Right, thank you. Actually, that is quite important issue in East Asia at this time. That simply caused by Japan factors. The main reason why China simply give up to maintain that idea of ASEAN plus 3 rather than the ASEAN plus 6, so, and that deliver their leadership to ASEAN. Okay, actually, if they conduct ASEAN plus 3, the initial plan, the China will dominate our world, but because of the TPP, the rivalry coming from Pacific side, China to reduce the damage coming from the TPP, just accept that expansion of the ASEAN plus 3 to RCEP, which has been strongly pursued by Japan. So that's the Japan factor. One of the reasons why Korea declared the interest in joining TPP, mainly because of Japan. So as you know, Korea has bilateral FTA with most of the potential members of TPP. So there's nothing to get for marginal benefit by joining TPP. But we do have a problem to form a trade liberalization with Japan. But if you just join the TPP, then automatically we may have complete the Korea-Japan FTA. That is the more important agenda. Also in Korea, the forming a trade bloc with Japan has very strong resistance, especially from small and medium-sized enterprise. So to persuade for them to take this one, then we need to have some external pressure. Okay, so that is another the factor, but unlikely we may not join the first round of negotiation in that closed door. So currently, many of the Korean economists are very reluctant why our government declared not early, not late, just a very untimely decision. So that is kind of criticism in our the Korean peninsula, and those are some kind of the feeling in the East Asian region.
Yes, I think we had a question over here.
Yeah, Erling Rimestad from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You partly answered my my question now, but would it be possible to comment a little bit more on the fact that some countries are digesting the whole noodle ball at the same time, and to what extent do the negotiations on trade agreements and especially the TPP and the RCEP overlap, and to what extent may they create in a way a movement towards the same goal?
Mm-hmm. Okay, actually harmonizing kind of a best practice for RTAs, both in RCEP and the TPP, is the most important agenda, but each of them has the same factor which can be recognized as a weakness point to the strongest point. For example, RCEP, we are very flexible, so it is very strong point, so anybody can join, but it doesn't mean everybody can join because it is too flexible. Okay, so we're gonna just neglect. So whenever we go, it doesn't matter. So that is the problem. But TPP, very high standard. So, but the members, potential members, may not afford that high standard. So that can be a weakness and that can be strong. As you can notice, actually the TPP should be completed in last year, right? But still going on. So in our region, everybody expect the most optimistic case, it could be completed by the end of year 2015 or year 2016. Even that time, there is kind of the very efficient negotiation between Japan and US. But last month, Obama visited Japan to persuade, but he failed. So we are very pessimistic about the completion of TPP. So it's kind of, we are worrying about those idea of RCEP and TPP may be kind of a copycat of APEC, just a talking point. But the talking point doesn't mean it is not needed, because at least we are talking. So if it is needed, we may move, we may take an action. So that can be a important factor. So in our reason, the common factor can be recognized as the weakness or as the strength. So that is kind of a dilemma we do have at this time. But who will make those factors to be more, stronger point? So the leadership is very important. But as you can see, RCEP, nobody is leading it. We have just asked ASEAN to do something, but ASEAN has no incentive to move toward RCEP. Current 5 set of ASEAN plus 1 is much better than the expansion of the East Asian RTAs for ASEAN. So there's no incentive. Why do we have to move up, move to bigger, right? So that's the one problem. TPP, many developing potential members like some Vietnam, Malaysia, they actually do not have any incentive to accept that kind of high standard. So we do worry about the future participants like Indonesia and India, but they may not accept, may not take, even China may not take that kind of high standard. So it is kind of some problems both of RCEP and TPP have at this time. So frankly speaking, I'm very pessimistic about the realization of RCEP and TPP in near future.
There was a question in the back there.
Okay, it's Tord Alston from the Foreign Ministry's Economic and Commercial section. Just one kind of observation. Not a word really has been said about the World Trade Organization. Because we all know that there has been some difficulties, but naturally we have those free trade agreements, and there must be some kind of connection. So in other words, out of FTAs, would they be counterproductive towards the WTO? Can they underpin the future working of the WTO? So if you have some elaboration on that, I would really help.
Okay, actually, my major interest is in regionalism rather than globalism. But as I just hinted, when I was a PhD student, many of a brand new PhD in this field of study got their PhD degree by evaluating whether the regionalism can be a stepping stone for globalization or a stumbling block. Okay, so just a membership problem. But recently, we are more focused on the multilateralizing RTAs in a framework of globalization. So we are trying to harmonize the existing RTAs. Then we expect the role of WTO is very important for multilateralizing this kind of regionalism. So, and that's the one thing. And another factor, actually, when we have global financial crisis recently, everybody believe WTO may regain their controlling their operation power to harmonize or consolidate the currently activating the proliferating RTAs. So 1997, when we have the regional crisis, the regionalism can be an answer to solve the problem. But currently, we do have a global crisis. We found that the regional cooperation may not be very effective, so a global cooperation is more suitable. So in the sense, WTO may have a chance, but I think they lost their chance. That's what I feel.
Let me add to what Inwon just said. I think in response to your question, right? I mean, I think it's instructive to go back to the example of TPP and what Inwon just talked about, which is President Obama, right, going to Japan a few weeks ago, I think. It tried to close the deal, right, on the TPP, because U.S. and Japan are the two key players, right? And it's and in terms of political economy considerations, it's basically an let's call TPP for what it is. It's an anti-China trade bloc. But the point is, even among two very developed countries with a strong geopolitical common interest, which is, to put it very simplistically, which is containing China, even if those two countries cannot come to an agreement, then of course the chances are multiplied, right? Many times for WTO and these kinds of multilateral initiatives. So anyway, in any case, to answer your question more directly, we have all this regionalism, right? This noodle bowl, spaghetti bowl, TPP, all these discussions, precisely because I think most countries in the world, in Asia, in Europe, and in virtually the entire world, have actually more or less, for the moment at least, given up on WTO and multilateral negotiations, which is why they're pursuing the second best option, which is regional, right? Regional cooperation. But even there, as you can see, it's not easy. Like Japan and US on TPP. Even countries with very strong common interest, common geopolitical interest, have difficulty in arriving at an agreement.
Yes, Ulf had a comment.
First, I'd like to thank you both for two very good contributions, and particularly you, since you talked so warmly about the report and also suggested how to move this forward. This could come in handy for us when we continue our discussion with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So thank you for that. And we heard two very interesting presentations. And I have a question, trying to link those two presentations, because what you say is the aging population is going to represent a significant economic challenge. And one of the main issues is how to turn this into some kind of further growth rather than to slow down growth. And I just wonder, how is the aging component playing into the regional integration? Is it so that it will kind of increase the incentives, increase the willingness to engage in this, or will an aging population become more locally oriented, more kind of nationalistic, or less interested in engaging in competition? I just wonder, is there some kind of connection between?
Well, I have a very crystal clear response to that, and it's the one word is services and services trade, because as populations grow older, in relative terms, there's going to be greater demand for services. If you think about it, older people, they need and demand financial services, they need and demand healthcare, they need, and at least the middle class and above Asians, the older Asians, they travel abroad, more generally increase leisure. So there's going to be this, and that strong increase in demand for services. But that's going to give further impetus to calls for liberalizing trade in services, which we badly need anyway, because our services lag our manufacturing in terms of productivity. According to that ADB study, it will take 30 years for most developed, even Malaysia, even relatively high-income Malaysia, a relatively high income in the Asian context, it'll take Malaysia a good 30 years, according to estimate, to even reach 20% of OECD's current labor productivity in services. Staggering as that number may seem, that's what we find. So services trade liberalization, certainly we need a lot of that, but because as our incomes grow fast, but don't get me wrong, the primary catalyst of growth in services on the demand side is going to be our very fast expansion of the middle class. Millions of Chinese opening their first bank accounts, millions of Indians taking their first flights from Mumbai to Delhi and so forth. That'll be the primary catalyst of growth of services. But this aging population will be another significant driver, and in the context relating to that to trade, both, I think that's going to be a key. Aging and services trade and growing demand for services, trade liberalization. I think that's the nexus between aging on one hand and trade liberalization on the other hand. In one word, services, or two words, services sector.
Actually, I'm not have any deep knowledge about this relationship between aging population and the formation of effect on RTAs, but just after you asked, I seem to have something just past my thinking. Actually, this aging population problem may change kind of the structure of regional value chains. So international division of labor at this time will be shifted to considering that aging population. So and the other one is, as he mentioned, about the service industry. So based on the demographic, the structure. So we may have some much stronger complementarity if you form RTAs. Some young population countries may focus more on manufacturing, and then some old the population country may focus more on the service industry. Then they're not going to compete, have to form a trade bloc. So then we may have more trade creation effect than trade diversion effect. So that is just a spot idea, but I don't know whether I have no deep survey on that.
Yeah, it's a very good point that Inwan mentioned, though, because Asia as a whole is aging, but I think it should be emphasized there's still a lot of diversity in terms of the level and speed of population aging. So a lot of this manufacturing production, which has implications for production network and global value chain and so forth, will be shifting from, let's say, coastal China. Some of that production will shift to central and western China, but some of it will move to other countries in Asia and even beyond. And that will, of course, have implications, as Inwan implied, for the regionalism and regional trade agreements.
Okay, I think Arne had a question.
Yes, I would also like to thank Donghyun for the constructive and positive comment to the report, and I certainly agree that many of these areas are very important to pursue in the future. So for services, the structural transformation of Asia, the graphs showed, the share of Asia in services is lower, so this will change over time. And this will be important, and it's important for Norway's participation in the value chains beyond shipping and energy-related services, oil-related services, etc. So that's certainly interesting. I think for services, we also showed that even to an even greater extent than goods, services trade is driven by FDI and local presence. So this link, studying trade and FDI jointly, is very important for services. For services, furthermore, we have big trouble with data, because consistent time series of data with sectoral breakdown is very hard to get. So in Norway, the services trade statistics is really tricky. We got what there was, but it's hard to
and it's much worse in developing Asia. Yeah, but anyway, services data is a big problem, and services trade data is a big problem.
Yeah. So that makes it difficult. So probably one has to do more micro level, etc. Studies to grasp this problem. So, but I agree, really, it's very important. So, thanks a lot. So we'll try to follow up on this thing.
Yes. Are there any further questions? Then I think it's about time to round up. So then I will say again, thank you very much. First of all, taking the time to take this pretty long trip. all the way over to Norway, for giving excellent contributions to the report, and for giving very nice speeches and having a very interesting and constructive debate, I think. I would also like to say thank you to the whole audience for coming here and listening and asking good questions and participating in the whole arrangement. Thank you.
Thank you very much.